You know what is strangely painful? Someone says something that clearly hurts you, and instead of reacting, instead of defending yourself, instead of even saying, that wasn't okay, you go completely quiet. Not because you didn't notice it, not because it didn't matter, and not because you had nothing to say. In fact, sometimes the silence happens precisely because it mattered too much. A comment at dinner, a joke that lands like a bruise, a dismissive tone from a partner, a friend who crosses a line, a parent who says the one thing that still gets under your skin, even after all these years. And there you are, nodding slightly, looking away, changing the subject, acting normal, maybe even smiling. Then later, usually much later, the real conversation begins, inside your own head. Why didn't I say anything? Why do I always do this? Why do I stay quiet even when I'm clearly hurt? This is one of those human behaviors that many people experience, but very few people really understand. And because they don't understand it, they often explain it in harsh ways. They call it weakness, low self respect, being too sensitive, being too passive, not having boundaries, not being strong enough, not being honest enough. But psychology gives a much deeper explanation, because staying quiet when you're hurt is often not a character flaw, it is a pattern, a nervous system response, a social survival habit, sometimes a form of emotional intelligence, sometimes a trauma adaptation, sometimes a learned behavior so old that it activates before your conscious mind has even caught up. And once you understand the hidden psychology behind it, something important starts to happen. You stop seeing your silence as proof that something is wrong with you, and you begin to see it as evidence that your mind and body have been trying, in their own imperfect way, to protect you. That does not mean the habit is always healthy. It does not mean it never needs to be changed. But it does mean it deserves to be understood before it is judged. Because the truth is, silence is rarely empty. Silence often contains fear, memory, calculation, loyalty, shame, love, confusion, and self protection all at once. So let's talk about why this happens, why some people go quiet when they feel wounded, why the mind sometimes chooses stillness over confrontation, and why a person can be deeply hurt on the inside while appearing completely calm on the outside. One of the first things psychology helps us understand is that when you are hurt, your brain does not simply ask, "What do I feel?" It also asks, very quickly and often unconsciously, "What is safest?" That question matters more than most people realize. We often imagine emotional pain as something that should automatically produce emotional expression. If you are hurt, you should look hurt. If you are angry, you should sound angry. If someone crosses a line, you should respond in real time. But human behavior does not work that neatly. The brain is not only an emotional organ, it is a prediction machine. It is constantly scanning for danger, calculating consequences, and choosing responses based not just on what is true, but on what seems survivable. This is where the classic stress responses come in. Most people know about fight or flight, some also know freeze, but there is another pattern that matters a lot in relationships and social situations: fawn or appease. There is also what many researchers and clinicians describe as a shutdown or collapse response, where expression narrows and the system becomes inward, quiet, and restrained. So when someone hurts you and you say nothing, your silence may not be indecision at all. It may be your nervous system choosing the response it has learned is least dangerous. That is a very different explanation. If you grew up in an environment where speaking up led to punishment, ridicule, emotional withdrawal, or escalation, your brain may have learned an important lesson very early. Silence keeps the peace. Silence prevents worse pain. Silence reduces risk. Children are especially sensitive to this because they depend on other people for emotional and physical survival. A child cannot simply leave the room forever, end the relationship, or calmly set adult boundaries. So the child adapts. The child studies tone. The child watches moods. The child learns which version of themselves is safest, and often, one of the safest versions is the quiet one. This is why attachment psychology is so relevant here. John Bowlby's work on attachment and later research that expanded it showed that our early relationships shape not just how we love, but how we regulate emotions, perceive threat, and respond to interpersonal pain. If closeness was unpredictable, if affection came with criticism, if honesty led to shame, or if emotional needs were dismissed, then being hurt may become linked with suppression rather than expression. In other words, stay quiet can become a habit of survival long before it becomes a personality trait. And this is one of the hidden secrets of adult behavior. What looks like passivity in the present is often a very old strategy from the past. You may think, I'm just bad at confrontation, but your nervous system may be saying something else. It may be saying, we've been here before. Last time this went badly. Let's not make it worse. This is also why some people only realize they were hurt hours later. At the moment of impact, the system is busy managing danger, not processing meaning. The body gets tight, the mind gets foggy, words disappear, memory becomes strangely selective. You think of the perfect response in the shower or in bed or halfway through the next day, because only then has your system decided the threat has passed enough for reflection to begin. That delay is not imaginary. It has a psychological explanation. When stress rises, activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part involved in reflection, language, planning, and flexible thinking, can become less available. Meanwhile, more primitive survival systems become more active. So in that painful moment, your brain may not be failing you. It may be prioritizing immediate regulation over articulate self-expression. This is why people often say, I froze, even when nothing visibly dramatic happened. They didn't literally stop functioning, they socially froze, they emotionally narrowed, they became quiet. And here is where things become even more interesting. Sometimes silence is not just about fear, sometimes it is about loyalty. Many people who stay quiet when hurt are not only trying to protect themselves, they are also trying to protect the relationship, the atmosphere, the other person's feelings, or the image of themselves as easygoing, kind, mature, and not difficult. This matters because human beings are profoundly social creatures. We do not just want safety, we want belonging. We want to be understood. We want to remain connected. And in many families, friendships, and cultures, direct expression of hurt is unconsciously coded as dangerous to social harmony. So a person learns another rule. If I speak, I may lose connection. If I stay quiet, I may keep it. That rule becomes a habit. That habit becomes a personality. And eventually, everyone says, you're just so calm, without seeing the cost of that calm. The cost can be enormous because unspoken hurt does not disappear. It usually relocates. It becomes overthinking. It becomes exhaustion after social interactions. It becomes quiet resentment. It becomes anxiety before certain people. It becomes a strange heaviness you cannot explain. It becomes distance. It becomes the feeling that no one really knows you because the parts of you that get hurt are the very parts you keep hidden. This is why chronic silence can create loneliness even in close relationships. You can be surrounded by people and still feel deeply alone if your real emotional experience is never voiced. And that loneliness has its own psychology. Research on social pain suggests that emotional exclusion and interpersonal hurt activate some of the same neural pathways involved in physical pain. In other words, the pain of being dismissed, misunderstood, mocked, or devalued is not just in your head in the trivial sense people often mean. It is a real experience affecting your body, cognition, memory, and behavior. So when people minimize your hurt by saying, you should have just said something, they are skipping over the complexity of what was happening internally. They are ignoring the layers because there are layers. One layer is threat detection. Another is attachment, another is self-esteem, another is learned social behavior, another is identity. Let's talk about identity, because this is where many quiet people become especially stuck. Some people do not stay silent only because they are afraid of conflict. They stay silent because they have built an entire self-concept around being the reasonable one, the one who understands, the one who doesn't overreact, the one who can take a joke, the one who is low maintenance, the one who keeps things together, the one who doesn't make everything into a problem. That identity can feel noble, sometimes it even is, but it can also become a prison because once your self-worth depends on being undemanding, every boundary feels like a threat to your identity. Every honest reaction feels like failure. Every moment of pain becomes something you have to edit, soften, or hide. This creates a painful paradox. You are hurt by other people, then you hurt yourself by acting as if your hurt is too inconvenient to mention. Psychology has long studied self silencing, especially in the context of relationships, gender roles, social approval, and emotional regulation. Researchers have found that some people habitually suppress their own needs and feelings in order to maintain closeness or avoid rejection. But the irony is that this strategy, while understandable, often increases depression, resentment, and disconnection over time. So the very behavior meant to preserve love can slowly damage it. Why? Because relationships cannot truly adapt to feelings that are never expressed. People cannot respond to pain they never see. Patterns cannot change if they remain invisible. Now, of course, not every silence is unhealthy. This nuance matters. Sometimes staying quiet is wisdom. Sometimes not every comment deserves your energy. Sometimes speaking in the heat of pain would only escalate things. Sometimes you genuinely need time to understand what you feel. Sometimes the most intelligent response is not immediate confrontation, but delayed clarity. Silence can be thoughtful. Silence can be emotionally mature. Silence can be strategic. But there is a difference between chosen silence and compelled silence. Chosen silence feels grounded. Compelled silence feels trapped. Chosen silence says, I could speak, but I'm deciding not to right now. Compelled silence says, I want to speak, but something in me won't let me. That difference is one of the biggest psychological signs to pay attention to. Another important reason people stay quiet when hurt is shame. Shame changes everything. If anger says, that was wrong, shame says, maybe I'm wrong. If hurt says, that comment affected me, shame says, I shouldn't be affected. If instinct says, I need care, shame says, needing care makes me weak. This internal conflict can shut down expression almost instantly. Shame is especially powerful when a person has been taught, directly or indirectly, that their emotions are too much, inconvenient, irrational, dramatic, or embarrassing. Over time, they begin to anticipate invalidation before it even happens. They silence themselves in advance. This is one reason highly sensitive, anxious, or socially attuned people may go quiet so quickly. They are not simply feeling the original hurt, they are also imagining the likely reaction to their hurt. Will I be dismissed? Will I be laughed at? Will I seem childish? Will they turn this back on me? Will I regret saying something? Will this make things awkward forever? And because the mind is so good at predicting social risk, especially if it has a history of painful experiences, the person may choose silence as the least humiliating option. There is also the role of power. People do not stay quiet in a vacuum, they stay quiet in contexts. A child may stay quiet with a parent, an employee with a boss, a partner with a dominating spouse, a student with a teacher, a person from a marginalized group in a room where speaking up has consequences others do not face. So if someone repeatedly stays quiet when hurt, psychology asks an important question. What are the actual or perceived costs of speaking here? Sometimes those costs are emotional, sometimes they are social, sometimes they are economic, sometimes they are physical, sometimes they are subtle but still powerful. The human mind is very intelligent about power, even when that intelligence is mostly unconscious. It notices who gets punished, it notices whose feelings matter, it notices when honesty leads to loss, and it adjusts behavior accordingly. This is why two people can experience the same hurtful comment and respond very differently. One speaks immediately, the other says nothing. This does not automatically mean one is strong and the other is weak. It may mean their nervous systems, histories, and social calculations are completely different. That is a more compassionate and more accurate way to understand behavior. There is another hidden pattern here that many people miss. Sometimes silence protects hope. If you speak up, the relationship may reveal what it really is. If you stay quiet, you can postpone that discovery. This is painful but deeply human. Many people remain silent not because they do not see the problem, but because speaking would force a truth they are not ready to face. That a friend is not as kind as they thought, that a parent may never understand them, that a partner does not handle vulnerability well, that a family system depends on denial, that someone they love makes them feel small. Silence, in this case, becomes a way of preserving the possibility that things are better than they seem. It is a temporary shelter from disappointment, and again, this does not make a person foolish, it makes them human. Hope can keep people alive, but it can also keep them quiet for too long. At this point, a lot of people begin to recognize themselves, and when they do, They often make a very harsh conclusion. They say, "So I have no boundaries." But that is not always the best explanation. Sometimes the problem is not that you have no boundaries, it is that your boundaries are felt internally but not expressed externally. You know when something is off. You know when a line has been crossed. Your body knows, your mood knows, your sleep knows, your rumination knows. The issue is not lack of perception, it is interruption between perception and expression. Something breaks in the middle. A fear, a habit, a memory, a shame response, a people-pleasing reflex, a freeze response, a lifelong thought that says, "Don't make this worse." This is actually a very important distinction because it changes how healing works. If you think you have no feelings, no standards, no self-respect, you may attack yourself. But if you understand that the real issue is the pathway between inner experience and outer communication, then the work becomes more practical and less condemning. Now you are not trying to become a completely different person. You are trying to build a bridge between what you feel and what you can safely say. And that bridge is built slowly, first through awareness. One of the most powerful things a person can do is start noticing the early signs that they have been hurt before they disappear into silence completely. This may sound obvious, but for many people it is not. Because when you have spent years minimizing your own emotions, your internal signals become faint. So the signs may appear first in the body: a drop in the stomach, a tight jaw, a strange heat in the chest, a sudden urge to smile while feeling bad, a blank mind, a need to leave the room, a racing replay of the moment. These are psychological and physiological clues. They are signs that something in you registered a threat or a wound. The next step is learning a simple internal language, not dramatic language, not perfect language, just honest language. That hurt. I didn't like that. Something about that felt disrespectful. I need a moment. I'm not ready to respond yet, but that didn't sit right with me. This matters because one reason people stay quiet is that they think speaking up requires a perfect speech, airtight logic, total confidence, and zero emotion. It does not. In fact, one of the healthiest habits is replacing courtroom communication with truthful communication. You do not need to prove your pain beyond doubt. You only need to express your experience clearly enough for it to exist outside your body. That alone can change a lot. And for some people, especially those with a long history of anxiety, trauma, people-pleasing, or low self-esteem, the first real act of repair is not confrontation, it is permission. Permission to take your own feelings seriously. Permission to believe your internal experience before others approve it. Permission to say, "I need time." Permission to revisit a moment later. Permission to stop performing okayness. Because many people who stay quiet when hurt are not actually calm. They are performing calm to remain acceptable. That performance can become exhausting, and eventually, it often breaks in one of two ways. Either the person becomes numb and detached, or all the accumulated silence comes out at once, often much more intensely than the original moment required. This is another reason understanding the psychology matters. When unspoken pain piles up, present conflicts start carrying past pain. A small comment now touches 10 old memories. A minor slight activates years of invisibility. Then the reaction seems too much, when in reality it is not about one moment, it is about a pattern. This is why healing is not just about learning to speak louder, it is also about updating the nervous system, teaching it that expression is possible, teaching it that not every disagreement leads to catastrophe, teaching it that your present self has options your past self did not. This takes repetition and gentleness and often support, sometimes from a trusted friend, sometimes from journaling and reflection, sometimes from therapy, sometimes from practicing one-sentence boundaries in low-risk situations before trying them in high-risk ones. Because the goal is not to become aggressive, it is not to stop being kind, it is not to become emotionally hard. The goal is integration, to let your thoughts, feelings, body, and voice belong to the same person, to stop living in that split state where your inner world screams and your outer self smiles politely. There is something else worth saying here because it is easy to misunderstand quiet people. People who stay silent when hurt are often assumed to feel less, but in many cases the opposite is true. They may feel more, they may notice more, they may be more socially aware, more conflict sensitive, more attuned to tone, more conscious of consequences. Their silence may reflect not emptiness but complexity. They are running many calculations at once. What did they mean? Am I overreacting? Is this a pattern? Will speaking help? Can this relationship hold honesty? What is the mood in the room? How much of this is about today and how much is about my past? Is this safe? Is this worth it? That is not a lack of intelligence. It is often a very intelligent mind trying to navigate emotional danger. The problem is that intelligence without permission can still lead to suffering. You can understand everyone else and still abandon yourself. You can be insightful and still stay silent. You can explain behavior beautifully and still struggle to protect your own heart in real time. So if this is your pattern, the deeper lesson is not that you are broken, it is that your psychology makes sense. Your habits make sense. Your silence makes sense. But making sense and being sustainable are not the same thing. A behavior can be understandable and still painful, protective and still limiting, normal and still lonely. That is where change begins, not with self-attack, not with embarrassment, but with understanding. Understanding why your voice disappears, understanding what your nervous system is trying to do, understanding which relationships make speech feel dangerous, understanding which old beliefs still shape your present behavior, understanding the difference between peace and suppression. Because once you understand the hidden psychology, your silence stops looking like a mystery. It starts looking like a message about where you learned safety, a message about what your body expects from people, a message about your attachment wounds, your social experiences, your self-esteem, your fear of rejection, your longing for connection, and perhaps most importantly, a message that says this: some part of you believes that staying quiet is safer than being fully seen. That belief deserves compassion, but it also deserves to be questioned, because not every environment is your past, not every relationship is built on punishment. Not every truth destroys connection, and not every expression of hurt is a threat to love. Sometimes it is the beginning of a more honest kind of love. Sometimes it is the first sign that your relationship with yourself is changing. Sometimes it is the moment your outer life finally catches up with what your inner life has known for years. So the next time you go quiet after being hurt, don't rush to judge yourself. Get curious. What did I fear would happen if I spoke? What old habit just got activated? What feeling am I protecting? What relationship am I trying to preserve? What part of me still thinks silence is the price of belonging? Those questions matter, because psychology is not only about explanation, it is also about recognition, and there is real power in recognizing that your silence was never random. It had a reason, maybe several. It may have been built from childhood, shaped by anxiety, strengthened by shame, rewarded by family systems, refined by social experience, protected by your nervous system, hidden inside your personality as if it were just how you are. But who you had to be to survive is not always who you have to remain. That is one of the most important things to understand about human behavior. Our patterns feel personal, but many of them are adaptations, and adaptations can change when they are finally understood. So if you are someone who stays quiet even when you're hurt, this does not mean you are weak, strange, dramatic, broken, or doomed to repeat it forever. It may mean you learned early that your feelings were safest in private. It may mean your body still confuses honesty with danger. It may mean your mind is trying to avoid rejection, conflict, or loss. It may mean you care deeply about people and struggle to include yourself in that care. And that is painful, but it is also workable. Because once you can see the pattern, you can begin to interrupt it. Not all at once, not perfectly, but gradually. A pause, a sentence, a boundary, a delayed reply that is still honest, a refusal to smile when you feel small, a new habit of taking your own hurt seriously. These things may look small from the outside. Psychologically, they are enormous. They are the moment silence stops being your only language. And maybe that is the deeper secret here. The goal is not to become someone who is never quiet. Silence itself is not the enemy. The goal is to make sure your quiet is a choice, not a prison, a pause, not a disappearance, a form of wisdom, not self-erasure, because you were never meant to be so understandable to everyone else and so invisible to yourself. And the moment you begin to understand the hidden psychology of your silence, you are already a little closer to changing it.